Hi, I'm Stasi and I'm a fashion design student at British High School of Art and Design in Moscow. Since we've just had our first assessment for the degree collection year, today I'm going to be showing you my Semester A sketchbook. Actually, if you're wondering what's behind me is a big piece of fabric which Anna and I decided to strap our samples to, and this is my little sketchbook from Semester A, which I'm going to be showing you right now. Let's get into it. So this is my Semester A sketchbook. I made it myself because it's way cheaper this way. I just had to pay for paper and then bound it myself, sewed it on a sewing machine, and I'm probably going to upload a video on how I made it or just link a couple of those down below. One thing I want to preface this video with is that sketchbooks now for me are something way different than they were when I just applied to this university, because when I applied I thought that sketchbook was just a place for nearly finished pieces to be inside of, or like actual finished drawings, but then now it's a cluster of your ideas. It's every thought that you had about the project, anything that you thought of, even if you found like a piece of paper on the street that you felt was a bit connected to your research or inspired you in some way, it has to be in the sketchbook. So this is a clusterfuck of my emotions, my thoughts, or my ideas about the project, and you will see the development of them throughout the sketchbook itself as well. So I started it with a potential color palette which I wanted to use in the projects, and then just a random self-portrait of me because I started in the summer and then I was kind of interested in the project, or not in the project, in portraits. Here we have the schedule for the first couple of weeks of the project and the first proposal which I did when we had to start the project with. Then I began by making a first mood board. I knew that I wanted to talk about the idea of frustration with documents and how, despite the fact that I am a Russian person born in Estonia, I have so many troubles existing in Russia because I have to go through a lot of documents, a lot of registration forms and everything, and I was just so tired and pissed off at the paperwork that I just got angry, crumbled up all the pieces. And when I was at home, I went through my parents' documents and I found a lot of different old passports, Estonian Soviet passports, independent Estonian passport, European Union Estonian passport. I was interested in passport photography and how your identity gets changed throughout the idea, but this is like a raw thoughts, raw ideas. Then because I was looking at passport photos, I just added a bunch of those which were lying around in the pack of old passport photos that my parents collected throughout the years. And then I found my mom wearing the jacket, which I mentioned in a bunch of different videos, which I drew in here as well because I feel like it's such a statement piece. Like a jacket is usually what you go taking passport photos wearing in Russian society, at least I feel like. It has to be kind of formal, and jacket is the epitome of formality. Then this was just a random patch because I also was thinking about working with the family memories and old family album photos. I wanted to look back at the clothing on family photos which I felt like was connecting with me, which I remembered the most, and then I looked at my sister's dress, which I managed to wear later on as well, so I was interested in this floral print. And also I love a clash of different prints, and in Estonian and Russian culture there's a lot of this happening, so you see a couple of those Estonian and Russian cultural dresses as well. These fabric pieces are not the pieces that I'm going to be using. Those are just inspiration ideas which I like to put in here in the sketchbook as well. Again, you see a bunch of passports which are scanned on a scanner. I love working with scanners because they give you so much inspiration and you can work around with them, and if you accidentally make a mistake it doesn't really matter because this mistake might inspire you later on as well. And I love how you can see like the blurred hand on the background. Again, a couple of older family photos which I tried to draw. I love the idea of layering. When I was a baby, my mom put a lot of clothing on me so that I wouldn't get cold, and my sister called me kubuyus, and because she was going to Estonian kindergarten and my parents weren't, they felt that this was such a funny word, even though this was like a direct reference from a book. So I wanted to kind of add those ideas as well and play around with layering. So I started playing around with using like an old sewing machine, a domestic sewing machine, and again play around with it. Some random photos, like I was wearing a sweater of my boyfriend's and I pulled it upwards and I liked the way it draped, so I drew the same idea using those pieces of fabric as an inspiration. Then I again played around on a scanner. I used old documents that my family had. I took my old ID card, my passport, different validation documents which I just distorted on a scanner alongside some photographs which I played around with in my older projects, and I was interested in seeing how this would be distorted, like the same way your identity gets distorted. And then this is one of the older samples which you might see in my videos, which I just decided to clip inside in here because this kind of correlates with the idea of distortion. This page was just a clusterfuck of all of the documents which I found at my parents' house, and decided to print them and add them inside because I was definitely going to be looking in the language of passports and like documents and different pieces. So I just wanted to look into different languages that your identification has. So I just added all those in. Again, old family photos, I was looking into formality because I was starting to be interested in formal elements, jackets, suits and all this. So I looked into my family's old photos, and I love the fact that everyone is wearing either sweaters or jackets with ties, and this was something I was kind of looking for, and I found it exactly. So I was playing around with it, and then my mom's and dad, their wedding photos, so I was very interested in ties and playing around with those. And because my dad has like a pocket square and then my mom has florals, and usually on weddings you have like a boutonniere in your pocket, I was interested in adding this idea and merging them together, so I made like a boutonniere out of ties, which you can see in here as well. I played around on a mannequin. I loved this idea too. I took it as an inspiration photo, and I love the layering over the jacket, so this is something I'll be playing around as well. But here you see like a bunch of those photos, the development and potential fabrication choice, which is kind of silky, and then idea thing which I could play around with. But this is like a very raw kind of a first step. Then I also distorted things a little bit. I was thinking of using distortion in different ways, so I had the distorted photograph and I printed out on transfer heat-proof paper, which I then transferred to the edge. So I like the idea that this could be flipped the other way around and you won't really see the face, and then here you will. Different random thoughts, quick manipulations, ideas of potential sustainable-ish, like recycled pieces of fabric turned into accessories, because later on, after we finish the collection, we can also make accessories and shoes and everything, and usually at the starting stages you can't really predict what the collection is going to look like, but you already have a bunch of ideas for accessories and later styling choices, so you have to kind of put them out on paper and forget about them later. I again played around with this, but then I went a different direction. I was interested in looking at the paper and all of those manipulations, so like actually taking passports and looking at the pages and everything. So I played around with this, looked into different ways like you can have traces of memories embedded in the way that the structure could look like. So this is an old book by an artist which I can't remember, unfortunately. The pieces of text were ripped out of the book, and then the only thing that you can see is the edge and like the binding, which I love, is so beautiful. And I will probably play around with this as well, but that's why I kind of tried to make something tactile, something similar in here, so that when you flip the sketchbook you can feel what is happening in here as well. It's because everything has to make sense, everything has to be connected, and I feel like this is one of my favorite sketches from the start, because I was looking into papers, into ways you can keep the documents. I was actually looking into how I bind my documents, how I keep them. So we have different files and folders and different mesh pieces, so I had a piece of mesh fabric in here as well for me to kind of remember what this was about. And I went to a book binding workshop in our university, and I found a way to keep documents without binding them, so this is something I'll be exploring as well. So all this language is going to be implemented in my work, as well as like paper clips and bulldog clips, because you keep the documents binded this way as well. And probably this can be a language for me to laser cut later on. I'm not sure yet, but this is very interesting and exciting. Then we have a page with some of the first digital fabric manipulations that I tried out. I took a bunch of the documents and just arranged them in a checkered pattern and checkered manner because of my mom's checkered jacket, which I'm so obsessed with. And then because I was not exactly happy with them, I tried to distort them on a scanner as well. So those were very regular, very typical, and then I just flipped them whilst the scan thingy was moving, so this got them distorted, and I was very excited about it because it gave me some unpredictable results, which I'm very happy with, and I'll be exploring later on as well. And here I was just trying to make it less digital because I'm not the biggest fan of just digital print, so I was trying to silk screen on top of it. I added regular ink as well as some textured ink, which I don't think I've buffed in here, but I definitely explored it for sure. Then so here you see a magnified version of that paper binding thing, which I made out of fabric, which is I think like a fusing, not interline fusing. Then I played around with crumbling of the checkered print, which I made with my documents, and then when I crumbled it up I felt like it looked kind of like shredded pieces of fabric, so I just took leftover pieces of fabric and put them in here, and then explored a version of trapping pieces of fabric in epoxy, which is not the most sustainable thing to do, so I'm going to be trying to explore bioplastics later on to play around with the same idea. Then tested out like an elastic thread, so I made some sharing different samples, and this one was the least favorite of mine out of the checkered patterns which I made, so I tried sharing, and I don't think it fits this project, but it might be interesting somewhere else. And then I played around with all of my samples, which I managed to do that at that point on the mannequin. Here I played around with all the other ones I made. This one was one of my favorite samples, and the first time I explored pleating in this project. I made a bunch of digital print samples with the checkers. Then I kind of interrupted those with pieces of fabric to make it a patchwork checkered piece. Then I printed on top of those with silkscreen and then pleated it as well. And also I added eyelets to hook the pieces of threads from it to hang it on the book. Because we are only doing 6 looks, I kind of mapped out the ideas which I had at that point. I was thinking of making something knitted, so a knitwear piece, a formal jacket piece, something looking like a person is coming out of a formal blank which they have to fill, like a registration blank, checkered piece, total red look, and then a chaotic look. I don't think it's going to be exactly like this, but I played around with knitting, and well, I was a huge fan of knitwear when I first started, and my first final major project on foundation was knitwear related. I'm not sure if I'm going to be adding it here because there's a lot of chaos happening anyway, so I might just break it in. Here was just like a thought process, something I tried to analyze, then one of the tutorial forms which we filled out, and then I started with my design development. Those ones I absolutely hate. Those are pieces of my samples, just random exploration. I tried to play around on the body and do a couple of designs. Some of those I don't mind, like this one I don't mind. This one I like the idea of pieces of fabric extending from the seams of the pants and kind of folding over the top. This one was probably like the inspiration for the pants that I actually submitted this time, but I'm not sure. So just playing around with a couple of samples and wrote down the schedule for me to fill out that week. And here is the start of our masterclass project, which we had I think like 2 months ago. Masha and I were in a group together, and we were supposed to pick one of the 6 designs in here, the sketches. We picked this one, as did all the other groups except one, and we had to recreate it in a very quick, fast response in 3D using calico, like a cheap fabric. And we tried to sketch out a couple of ideas, plan out the things, and then we had to, well, we were not obliged to do that, but we did like a small photo shoot. And then after that project we were back to working on our degree collection, which was very exciting. And so I looked back into the idea of documents and like formal photographs. I asked my friends to send their parents' photos, their own photos if they could find them, and I tried to analyze them. And I found a very heavily reoccurring pattern is that a lot of people are wearing sweaters, and all the sweaters are underlined with yellow in here. Then formal wear like jackets, suits, ties are underlined with red, and blue is like the underlining of a person wearing their best jewelry, their favorite thing, because I found like one woman wearing a lot of the same jewelry on all her photos, which was very exciting. And then I found a chart of the way you're supposed to take a passport photograph, which is very like strict and formal, which was very exciting for me to explore later on in the project. So when I was exploring it, I thought I could make like a mask, which you may have seen already because I've posted about it, and I was exploring the idea and trying to play around in the body as well. And this is for now one of my favorite sketches which I've done, and this was the actual inspiration for the trousers which I made as one of my prototypes this assessment. A couple of newer sketches, a few ideas of maybe implementing pieces. This was one of the samples which I hated, but I kind of tore it apart and kept one area of it which I didn't really mind, and I added it in here because the idea was kind of similar to the approach I was trying to take in here. Then I tried to play with laser cut because I found a method of trapping pieces of fabric in between semi-transparent mesh. I like this because I was trying to recycle fabric anyway, so I found a cool method. But then I was thinking very ambitiously that I could laser cut it later, but because it was not a flat piece of fabric, it was very much a crooked piece. It was very difficult to cut it, even though I kind of glue gunned it down to a piece of foam or whatever I was cutting it on top of. It didn't really work out as I wanted to, because I was initially planning on making this kind of scribble effect, cut it out of the thick fabric and then trying to play around with it on a body, making a 3D shape. It didn't really work out, but what did successfully happen was this paper clip, which I managed to use, and I'm going to be improving the idea on later on. But also with that fabric experimentation, because of the donated pieces which I got throughout the year, I found a color palette which I really like. This is like a more improved, more sophisticated version of that primary color palette which I had right from the start when you saw that face portrait what I started with. But this is not final yet, this is in progress, but I do like this color combination. I think it needs some freshness, maybe like a very lemon yellow, like acidic, very fresh color, but I'm not sure yet. And before I laser cut it, I tried to play around with it on the body, on the table, just folding it different ways, but it was so heavy and it was very difficult to play around with it on the body, so mostly on the table. Then, when I was exploring the idea of stamps, I made my own versions of those and I kind of magnified them, saying different things like neither one nor the other, neither Russian nor Estonian, all of that, because this is kind of the starting point and like the raw title of the project itself. So I kind of stamped those on the booty, and I feel like those are a bit too digital. So in the next videos somewhere this year, you're going to be seeing me playing around with lino cuts, because I want to make those a bit less digital. But I do like the positioning though. I love that they're on the booty. I feel like it's kind of provocative and I like it this way. Then, because I was playing around with ties, I didn't really want to use pre-made ties. I made my own tie prints, and if you remember that first blue dress that my sister wore, which got passed down to me later on, it was the main inspiration for those ties. I asked a couple of my friends to send their dad or anyone else's tacky ties, and I wanted it to look kind of intentionally tacky and intentionally bad. So I asked them to send them for me as reference so that I could play around with those, and I just basically kind of copied the idea by using my own floral print and my own juxtaposition of those ideas together, I guess. And for me, tie is something so formal, the epitome of formality, and that childish dress, which I have so many memories with, is the epitome of childishness, and I love this combination, like these opposing two ideas combined in one tie. So I played around with those, I tried different fabrication choice, I tried using recycled fabric, which didn't really work out on, but I tested, so I know now what I want to use. Then, because I was also thinking about the location, the transition points where you feel this feeling, I don't know, formality at the same time applied to you when you don't really like it, I was thinking about airports and how you're being patted down, how you're being asked to take your clothes off, your shoes off, how this is like a transition point in itself, like getting undressed is a transition from closed body to naked body. So I felt like this could imply something very interesting and added to my collection. So I was playing around with this, kind of getting undressed on camera, not fully undressed, I was wearing shorts, but it doesn't really matter. It was funny because it was basically public nudity, but in the studio in here, like right across the corner. So I was playing around with this, sketching those ideas out. I'm definitely going to be playing around with this a bit more. But this is what resulted out of that experiment. I had different iterations of that, sketched on top of those, added tracing paper, added different colors, sketched it out, magnified it. I played around a lot with that idea, and I'm definitely going to be playing more. Then I sketched a bit more, but out of that trouser experiment, if you remember my favorite sketch, I started making the trousers, and then I had a section done. I played around with this on the body the way it was intended, but then also positioned it differently in different sections. Maybe that could be a bit more interesting to me. This is how I like to work usually. I make a sample which I am thinking is going to be used in one area, and then I play around with it in different areas before I kind of lock it down and sew it to that section, because usually I find like 10 more interesting ways of using it in the project, which is kind of sad, I guess, because like accidents make better designs than I do, but I think that's just the process and something which belongs to me, even though this is an accidental choice. Then those trousers are kind of halfway done, and here you can see that process, and then that's a thick fabric sample, which is a bunch of fabrics stitched together, played around on a mannequin. Didn't really work out as I planned it to. When I presented it to the other tutorial session which we had with Claire, I got a bunch of different helpful points, which I later on tried to fulfill them. And after that, I started playing around with that mask, because I could not get rid of the thought that I wanted to make a mask which would look very fun and tacky as well. So I made a pattern for it. I transferred a print, and then this is what the mask looked like. You may have seen it on my Instagram. If you haven't, here's my Instagram, have a look. There's a bunch of behind the scenes content on the collection. And then I played a bit more with those ties. I had them printed out, but they were too small for me to make actual ties out of, so I kind of stitched them all together in a patchwork way, and I tried to play around with it on the body as well. But I felt like I still wanted to explore the pleating idea, so I made a pleating board and started using it. So I pleated one tie, which I managed to make, which was very small, but it looked kind of cool as a sample. And then I started pleating the fabric itself, so I later on used it a bit more, and then sketched a couple of ideas using those pleated pieces of fabric. And I also started playing around with a blank idea, like a person coming out of a blank, formal, square-ish idea. It didn't really work out at that point, but it was fine because the idea can be explored later on in this project. So after that, I started continuing the idea. I wanted to trap pieces of documents and kind of binding playing around with binding, and then Anna suggested there is a very specific way that in Soviet times people would bind documents, maybe not in just Russia but somewhere else as well. So you have like a bunch of documents in a folded piece of cardboard with eyelets and like a piece of string coming from within inside. So I explored this idea. I wanted to play around with this on a sleeve, which you can see here, but then I also added this to a side of the pant leg maybe, and then added this to the trousers I was playing around with. Didn't use that in the end, but it was fine. The idea was pretty cool, and I sketched out a similar idea of like having this extension coming out from the side. Those are the same tie prints which I made, but I wanted to explore the idea of using them as bias binding, so I printed them out in diagonal so that I could cut them out 3.5 centimeters right away. And then I wanted to also use them to make a different version of the pleated skirt which I made before. I'm not sure if I talked about it yet, but this is the same idea. I had the ties going horizontally and then I pleated them vertically, so I wanted to do the same thing but having the bias binding of the same ties go at the edge of those pleats. So that's why I wanted to explore that. And then because I knew that I wanted to play around with this, I kind of sketched out different ideas, exploring the same idea as I had on H&M project. So I wanted to make a bodysuit or something along the lines of that. So I wanted to play around with the shapes of the body, but I knew that I wanted to have some basis for it. I can't really just slap pieces of my samples in Photoshop on the body and like say, hey, I love this idea. So when I went home for this vacation, I knew that I wanted to film a little bit in the airport, which I'm not sure if they were happy about, but that's something I want to do for my research, is explore how you're being patted down in an airport, if there are certain sections and areas they have to control, they have to check. So maybe that could be the inspiration for the potential bodysuit or like a bodycon outfit which I can make. So when I played around with it, I had a tiny sample in here which you can't really see, but I can insert a photo if I find it, and I wanted to play around with this thing with the sample. So I kind of just pleated and played around with the drapery of calico. Didn't really want to play around with the actual fabric because I'm not sure what fabric I want to buy, and I don't really want to buy much fabric. I'm trying to recycle as much as I can, so I played on the mannequin, played with this idea, sketched a couple of options, which both of those I absolutely hate. They are too, I don't know, like David Bowie-ish, 70s inspired, 80s inspired, which is exactly the opposite of the vibe I'm going for, but it's kind of playful, so I like that this is playful because I want to make my collection playful too. And then this was one of the prototypes which I was attempting to make. I talked about this idea of coming out of the blanket multiple times, and the idea initially was like having one side of the body coming out of the blanket in a very formal way, so make it like a suit, a jacket or something, coming with a very formal trouser pant, maybe not as wide as this one, but perhaps just imagine that this goes very narrow, very formal, and then another side would be just a color explosion, playfulness explosion, to account to the idea that you're not what you're looking like on a passport, like you're the opposite of that, you're not the formal self that you might be portrayed as on your passport. Then, well, this was kind of me trying to attempt the same idea, but I hated this and I didn't really want to work with this, so I scrapped the whole idea, took the prototype apart and started playing around with different samples. Because my tutor, we have tutorials every week and we talk about our worries, what we like, what we don't like. She knew that I hated the previous page's prototype, and she said just scrap the idea, play with things that you like. No point for you to just hate your collection, it should be something that you love. So I just kept the only 3 designs that I loved from those range plans. By that point I think I had like 11 or 8 different designs, so there was not much to choose from, but I kept 3 that I really liked. So this person coming out of the blanket, very oversized, very, I don't know, straightforward idea, which I feel like is not bad at this stage at least. Finished the design for the trousers, which might be integrated in a sort of bodycon dress. We'll see how that goes. And then this idea I absolutely liked. This came from the exploration of that transition point from closed body to naked body. So I played around with that, hated all of those designs basically, and moved on. And then this was just like a photo from different angles of the trousers, almost finished. This was like a pre-assessment tutorial. The only thing that got changed later on was the waistline. I lifted it a little bit and had it kind of extend to the side and also fold over to account to the left side of the trousers as well. After that, because I was playing with pleating, I liked the idea. I thought that this could be something a bit more formal, like a combination of formal with informal, I don't know. And my tutor suggested that maybe I can make it something making like a suit jacket or something. So I sketched out the idea. I wanted to play around with that laser cut piece of this paper clip. So I played around with this on the body, and I didn't really like the way it turned out at first because it was a bit too symmetrical, I feel like. So I was trying to make it asymmetric, not be elongated all the way to the floor. So I tested a couple of options in Photoshop, was thinking of maybe merging it with the blank coming out from the sides and everything. So I sketched a couple of different options from the first different tryouts which I had on the body. I asked my groupmate Masha to model for me, to walk around to see if the thing is dynamic or not, and this kind of came from that movement. So I didn't really hate it. The only thing I didn't like is the back, because it goes straight across, and this is kind of the opposite of what the front looks like. So I wanted to play around with the back, and then ended up changing it completely. Because I was trying to test different options, I also just googled the different inspiration images which I found along the way. This kind of reminded me of the idea of the binding, which my groupmate Anna suggested a while ago. Then the pleating methods, I was trying to look for different versions of the way I could pleat it, because this was a very straightforward, very simple way of pleating. So I definitely knew I was going to go away from it at some point, but for the start I was trying playing around with this. Thought maybe instead of it being a dress or like a jacket or something, it could be a separate constructed piece, overalls or like an overall dress. Didn't really like it at first, but it was worth sketching out in my sketchbook. Then I just moved away from that idea because I was kind of stuck on it for a week. I didn't really like it, so I started playing around with the blank idea. I extended an actual registration blank and made it ginormous, then kind of signed in some areas, filled in, and then had it printed out. I fused a piece of fabric which I got from a fabric store and then played around with it on a body. I love the fact that I had like 50 different options from just one piece of fabric, and that's why you should, in my opinion, just play around with your fabric and play around with the ways you can have it on the body with your samples. I traced them, and well, it was not very helpful for me at this stage because I feel like it gets so redundant just tracing things. So I just tried to sketch out different options on the body, because I feel like hand drawing is very important in here, and it gives you so much more freedom, so much more ideas and the development of those things. So when I was sketching this one, I really liked the idea of having a very informal section coming out of the blank slug. Again, the same idea, the same repetition which I had throughout the development of the sketchbook. And then, because I wanted to incorporate my pleats, I was thinking of maybe adding them somewhere here. And at first I was thinking of, again, adding a very colorful block of fabric, especially since I had a sample with those yellow pleated kind of trouser-ish manipulations before. I was exploring the idea, and then I found a couple of more references which I really liked, maybe adding this as a side dart or coming out of the dart, and then having this extend with pleats, and that being maybe paperclip, or making a giant bulldog clip, which I'm definitely going to be making in this semester, but I didn't really have time to do that then. So on my prototype which I submitted, I actually added a tiny bulldog clip in there just for reference. And then Anna also sent me a really cool photo of someone else's signatures in their passports, in their Russian passports. So on that giant blank, I just multiplied my own signature because it's quite simple. I was thinking of having this section be merged with formality. So initially, this blank, I just tore a section out of it so that you can pull your head through. But the way I tore it kind of reminded me of lapels. So I later on just tested an idea of making this like a lapel extension, and that will be possible because in that blank, I tore the face out of right in the section when you would usually have your photograph, so there is like a very sharp square or like a rectangle where I could insert the actual piece into, so that could be doable. And I tested it out as one of the samples which I may have seen on that wall again as well, and I didn't really explore this idea from the start, and this is very simple, but yet I had to test it out to calm myself down. The way that your documents get distorted by your accidents, again, that you put I don't know, coffee cup on it, you spill something on top of it, so that was very interesting. I tested it out. This is like the ugliest page on my sketchbook because it was very rushing. I wanted to finish this spread just for me to look at it and kind of analyze. So I was doing the same, exploring the same idea. I had those yellow trousers which I pleated. I love them because I didn't have a giant enough pleating board to make the whole thing pleated in one go, and I was thinking either extending the pleating board or pleating the thing twice so that the whole length of the trousers would be pleated. But then when I was making them, when I was pressing them second time on the heat press, I felt like I could just crumble the bottom up to resemble the idea of crumbled up pieces of paper, which you do when you're angry, when you've fucked up another like a million millionth blank in a row. So I really like how it turned out. I would maybe have to fuse it to keep the shape of it better, but I love how the pleats extend into a crumpled up mess, which is just so beautiful, so lovely. So for this blank idea, I felt like maybe extending it and keeping it very white, very much like blank inspired. So I recreated the same trouser idea just on a white piece of fabric with that same blank print, which is the actual giant blank. So this was the way I submitted it. And then for my third prototype, which I go back to, which was the jacket idea, I kind of played around with this a little bit more, just hating redoing. So it ended up for now being like a dress. On one side, it's a very formal, very much like an office dress with dots, and then another side is just an explosion of spilling with different pieces of pleating, with the ties made into a skirt, which is pleated, so like everything kind of interconnected with each other. And then this was one of the pieces of fabric which kind of resembles the same tie print. And then, oh yeah, here are all the 3 prototypes which I submitted from different angles so that the examiner could see what was happening. Then I traced them. Those are my designs, just submitted in the same way that they were in rows on the giant A2 piece of paper, which I submitted. So here is the line of jackets, kind of jacket inspired, very formal-ish looking designs. Shorts, the shortest ones I had. Usually when the collection consists of 6 pieces, you don't want them to be redundant, you don't want them to all be just dresses or trousers or the same length. So I definitely had to play around with the length proportion, with scale, so I had to have some short ones, even though I'm not sure how I feel about them yet. Then the most heavily printed, heavily patterned pieces, my favorite row, and the white ones, and then the showstoppers, obviously. Yeah, so this is my semester A sketchbook. Like, I was trying so hard to finish the thing because I don't think I've ever finished a sketchbook during a study in uni, but it's just so sad because there's just like 7 pages left, I feel like, and I have a bunch of leftover pieces of research and like fabric and different things stuffed in the back of the sleeve. I'm definitely going to be reusing all of those. I know that usually the collections go a very different direction than they have started before the Christmas break, but I'm not sure. I can't really elaborate on that yet. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're interested to see a degree collection development from start to finish and some sustainability related topics along the way. I'm so passionate about sustainability and I'm trying to implement it in my life in many different ways, in my collection as well, but I'm also going to be filming a bunch of different videos because I've just recently transitioned to a more sustainable period, so I'm definitely going to be talking about that. Maybe in Russian, just because there's so many different videos about it in English and not enough in Russian, because this topic is kind of taboo-ish, I feel like, so I'm definitely going to be talking about that. But alongside of it, there's going to be a lot more degree collection development, sketchbooks, textiles, shapes, silhouettes, photo shoots, behind the scenes like makeup and all of this. So if you're interested to see that, definitely subscribe because I'm going to be filming it throughout the year and later as well. Thank you for watching. Bye.